good to have all of you back this week. We are going to be diving back into Romans, and this week we're going to be starting in Romans chapter 16, and we're still dealing with the how question. How exactly are we supposed to accomplish this mission for which we are called? We started this last time. We looked at the very first thing that is most essential to the how question, and that is money. But today we're going to look at the second thing, and that's what we're going to deal with today in our series entitled Made for a Mission. Well, last time we looked at money as being one of those essential factors in how we actually accomplish the mission. We saw money was used not only for giving money to relieve our brothers, but it was also to reach the lost. And it is absolutely essential. And that brings us to point number 2. How are we going to accomplish this mission? Not only does it require money, but it requires manpower. And this one is also absolutely essential, and I would say it is equal to the first. It must be stated, along with everything that I've said about how important money is to the mission, that money is vital, but it cannot be a substitute for your service. You can't just write a check so that other people can do the work. You have to do both. You have to give your money, but you also have to get your hands dirty at the same time. And this is what the first half of Romans chapter 16 is really all about. Paul, in this chapter, at the beginning of this chapter, he goes through a long list of greetings and gratitude for all the people and the workers that have made the mission possible. Now, we don't have time to examine in detail each one of them, so I just want to kind of highlight a few of the ones that Paul really highlights in the passage. And the first one that I want to talk about, if you look in Romans chapter 16, we're going to be looking at verses 1 to 16 today. And in verse number 1, he starts off with a lady named Phoebe. And he says this, he says, I commend unto you Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of the church which is at Centria. He says that you would receive her in the Lord as becometh saints, and that you assist her in whatsoever business that she hath need of you, for she hath been a succorer of many, and of myself also. You see, Phoebe is a servant of the church that is at Centria, which is actually quite close to Corinth. And Paul vouches for her because she's coming to Rome and she's in need of some assistance in some business. Now, we don't know exactly what business that is, and it wouldn't appear that Paul even necessarily knows what it is. He just says whatsoever business that she has need of, it doesn't really matter. Whatever business she has need of, you guys need to help her because she has been a succorer, he says, of many. And I know, I had to look that word up too. And it basically means that she was of great assistance to others. She was a helper of others, to many, and even to Paul himself. And so she has helped many, and now she is the one who needs some help. Now, do you see the lesson here? The point here, just right off the bat, is that business does not get done without people to help. That's the only thing. It's the only way that anything ever really gets done is if you have people to help. Phoebe was there for people. She was there to assist them, and to assist them greatly is the idea that Paul gives here, is that she has been of such great assistance that Paul says when she comes to town, hey, whatever it is that she needs, you help her with it. She has been such a great helper to many, and now she's the one that needs the help, and so you give her whatever she needs. And that's the only way that anything ever gets done, is if we have people like Phoebe, people who are leaders in the church in Centria, who are tremendous servants. Not only does it say that she was a succorer of many, it says that she was a servant in the church. someone who is willing to get in and actually do the work. That's the only way that anything ever gets done, is if you have people who are willing to commit to serve. But he also mentions, if you look in verse number 3, he mentions Priscilla and Aquila. He says, "Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers in Christ Jesus." And listen to what he says about them. He says, "Who have for my life laid down their own necks, unto whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. And likewise, greet the church that is in their house." Priscilla and Aquila were Paul's helpers in Christ Jesus, he says. You see, just to give you a little bit of the backstory, Paul met them first back when he was in Corinth. He met them in a synagogue in Corinth, and they were already disciples of Christ, and they were of the same profession as Paul. They were both tent makers, just like Paul was. And they took Paul in while he was there, and whenever he left, they went with him to Ephesus, right? And they stayed there in Ephesus when Paul moved on. They stayed in Ephesus, and they started a church in their house while they were there. And even while they were in Ephesus, if you remember the story back in Acts, they met Apollos when he came through. They led him to Christ, and they discipled him, and then they sent him to Achaia, where he was apparently a tremendous blessing to the believers that were there. And Aquila was originally from Italy, so apparently they went back to Rome, where they appear here to have another church in their house. And on top of that, Paul mentions here that they actually laid down their neck for Paul's own life. Okay, so do you see what kind of people these are? They took Paul in Corinth. Okay, and when Paul came to Corinth, he was in a really bad way. He was very down. He was very lonely. He was all by himself, and they took him in, and they became disciples of Paul. And then whenever Paul left, they went with him to Ephesus, and they started a church there in their own house. And Paul moved on to continue his work, but after they got that church secured, they then moved back to Rome, where Aquila was from, and they started another church in their house. And while they were in Ephesus, they discipled Apollos and sent him on to Achaia, where he could be a tremendous blessing for all of those churches. These guys are amazing. This couple here, they really don't get enough press in the Bible. But what it does say about them is remarkable. I believe that they really set the example for what a marriage is meant to be. And that is two people who are serving in the mission together. They were a spectacular blessing to Paul and to Apollos, who both went on to start many churches and make disciples all over the Gentile world. And they started at least 2 churches that we know of in the 2 most prominent cities in the world at that time, Rome and Ephesus. And Paul describes them here as helpers in Christ Jesus. Well, I think that's a bit of an understatement. I mean, if that's what a helper is, then let us all pray for that spiritual gift, right? Let us all be helpers in Christ Jesus. And along with the helpers, there are several who Paul refers to as laborers in Christ. And this is the same as a helper, but it's just with a little extra scoop of difficult on top. You see, these are the kind of people that it takes to make the mission move forward. It's only with people like Priscilla and Aquila. These are helpers in Christ Jesus. These were not the people who necessarily got the press. These were not the people who necessarily were in front all the time. But these were the people who made it happen. These are the kind of people that we need in the mission, is married couples who really do the job. When you look around your life, you have to ask yourself, are you helping the mission, or are you hurting the mission? Are you a help or are you a hindrance to the mission? Are you helping to make disciples? Are you helping churches to grow or to get started? Are you taking any personal risk for the sake of the mission? This couple did, and these are the kind of people, this is the kind of manpower that is required in order to accomplish our mission. Now listen, it could be that you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, well, I'm kind of new to the faith. I just got started. You have only got saved just a little while ago, and you're just now digging in, and you really haven't had a chance to really do anything necessarily. You're at that stage where you're just a learner, and you're just trying to soak it up. You're trying to learn the Bible. You're trying to learn maybe what your spiritual gifts are. You're trying to learn where you can fit in and how it is that you could be a help. And I want you to know that you have no idea what a blessing that you are just by being there. There are so many in this list that Paul calls well-beloved. He calls them beloved or approved. He calls them in Christ or chosen. And it doesn't necessarily mention any particular contribution, if there was any at all. Paul just loves them, and he's so thankful that they're there. It is a blessing. It is a blessing to the work just to see new believers walk through the door. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. Whenever I read this, what I think of is I think of Marcus Victor. That's who I think of when I read this. When I look at all the list of people that Paul refers to, that he focuses on what Phoebe has done. He focuses on what Priscilla and Aquila have done. But there's so many that are in the list that he just says, man, these guys are so well beloved. And he doesn't necessarily talk about their contribution. It's just the fact that they're there, and he's just so happy that they're there. And that's exactly what I think of when I think of Marcus Victor. He's a new believer in our church, and his name even sounds like he should be in this list, doesn't it? And right now he's being discipled, and he is growing, and man, listen, all Marcus has to do right now, he just has to show up. Every time he shows up to church, every time he shows up to our midweek Bible study, he just makes everybody else in the room happier. He gives all of us hope. He just lifts the spirits of everybody in the room. But then there are some in churches around the world who sadly never move past that stage. After decades in the Lord, still all that they do is just show up. These people have an impact on our churches as well, and it's not a positive one. You can hear the people talking, oh yeah, I know so-and-so. Yeah, they've been here for a long time. Yeah, they are so faithful. Yeah, but so are bumps on a log. I mean, we have to realize that Paul, even though he expresses that he is so thankful for those who are in Christ, for those who are so well beloved, right? But we have to remember that in time, you're going to have to, at some point, you're going to have to engage the mission. You're going to have to become a laborer. You're going to have to become a helper in Christ Jesus. You're going to have to become someone who is a servant in the mission. Now, there's one more couple that I want to point out in this list, and that is Andronicus and Junia. That's in verse 7. They were related to Paul. They were related to Paul somehow, either by blood or they were related because they were fellow countrymen. And these people, they actually served time together with Paul, and they actually were older than Paul in the Lord. They came to Christ before Paul did. Now, this couple, they were on the short list, if you will, of all the apostles, right? All the apostles, they were on the short list of like the greatest people. That's what it says about them. Everyone who was an apostle, all the apostles knew this couple and they respected them. And I think the reason is obvious. It isn't because they've just been around for a long time, because it does say that about them, that they came to Christ before Paul did. But it wasn't just because they had been around for a long time. That's not the reason that they were respected. And sadly, today, that seems to be all that it takes to earn respect in a church today. You just have to outlive everyone else. But there was so much more to this couple. No, these guys, they went to prison right alongside of Paul. I mean, they were willing to pay the price for the mission. Now that is the kind of people that it takes to accomplish the mission. People who are willing to suffer for it. People who are willing to risk something for it. Now, Paul also mentions two households in this list. Okay, he mentions Aristobulus and Narcissus in verses 10 and 11. And just like we need singles and just like we need married couples, I think it's so great that he mentions a couple of households here. When you look at your text there, he mentions a couple of households of Aristobulus and Narcissus. And we need those single people that are able to give all of their time. We need the married couples who are going to engage in the mission and really show us what a married couple is supposed to look like, to help us in the labor, in the mission. But these guys show us that the mission is not just for mom and dad. It's not just a mom and dad thing. It's meant to be, listen, the mission is meant to be a household endeavor. The mission is not just the mission of the church. It's supposed to be the mission of the family. People often ask me, whenever I go to preach other places, and they'll ask me, how do you kind of, once I'm off of the stage and we're kind of in the back rooms or we're having coffee or at a restaurant, and people who are in the ministry, they might ask me, how do you balance your work and regular life, your work life and your home life? How do you balance the two, work life and family life? And the answer that I always give them is, I don't even believe in having a balanced life. I think that is a real gross misconception that we have about the kind of life that we're supposed to live. I mean, when you look at the life of Jesus Christ and his disciples, his life wasn't balanced in the way that we talk about balance today. His life was about the mission. And it took up every part of his life. Every part of his life was connected to the mission. But when we talk about balance today, what we mean is that we want to compartmentalize the mission. And so we want to have the mission here in its compartment, but we still want to have all of our other compartments right alongside of it. And so when people ask me, how do you balance work life and family life? My answer is, I don't. Planting churches is not, at our house, planting churches is not Dad's job. Planting churches, the mission is the family business. The best way to engage the mission without neglecting your family is to involve them in the mission. Take your kids with you. When I would go on the high street, man, I try to drag as many of my kids with me. And of course, I have to give them credit. I don't have to drag them. They're usually the ones saying, can I come? I don't have to tell Mindy to engage the mission. That is what her mind is on. That's my wife, and she's wonderful. And so you want to work with your wife. You want to work with your kids. You want to take them with you in the mission. You want to make the mission your family business. And that is what it takes to accomplish this mission. It takes not just singles, it takes not just new believers, it takes not just couples, it takes entire households that are engaged in the mission. Okay, so I see really just three things. Okay, I want to point out three things that I see with regards to all of this manpower that is listed here. Three things that really stick out. All right, so if you're taking notes, this is what you want to write down. There are three things that are required by all of us. Number one is you can help, right? That's what he talks about here. He talks about people who are helpers in Christ Jesus. But he also talks about labor. Number two, you can labor in the mission. And number three, he references risk. Help, labor, and risk. And help is really where you can start. You can start by helping. That should be what it says literally on your t-shirt. It should be, how can I help? That should be our disposition when we walk through the doors of the church, when we're at our home, if we get a phone call, if we're in our communities. Our disposition should always be, how can I help? That's the best way that we can start. As we see in the example of Priscilla and Aquila, there is literally no limit to what that means to be a helper in Christ Jesus. Just find out what needs to be done and jump in. Just remember, if you are not helping the mission, then you are hindering the mission. And you say, well, that's not necessarily true. But it is. It is. And the reason why it's true is because even though you're not helping in the mission, you're still expecting everyone in the church to serve you. You're still expecting everyone in the church to be concerned about you, to pay attention to you, to call you, to visit you, to pay attention to your needs, to help you with your problems. But yet you're not contributing anything. So these kind of people, they're sucking the resources out of the church, but they're not supplying anything. And that's the reason why I say if you're not helping in the mission, then you are hindering it. You know, Paul had a similar situation in Thessalonica, where the church in that particular city, when he was in Thessalonica, they had kind of a communal thing going on where they had probably a lot of trouble around, a lot of persecution, and they had a communal situation where they would pool their resources and people would be fed often right out of the church. They would be given food and stuff to help them right out of the church. But there were some in the church that they refused to work. And they thought that even though they refused to work, that they could still take their fair share of the food. And Paul told them no. He said to them, here is the rule. If you don't work, then you don't eat. And I think that really, even though it's a totally different situation, I think that there is a real application here. And what I would say is that if you're not going to serve in the church, then I don't think you should be served by the church. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that. But to every person who is able-bodied, who is able to serve, if you're not going to serve, now, certainly your churches are going to be gracious. And they're probably going to serve you no matter what you do, because they love you and they care about you, and they're just going to serve you because they care. But if you're not going to serve in the church, then why should you expect to be served? So we can start by seeing just how it is that you can help. Next, number two, there is labor. These are the people that he mentions that labor in the Lord. And this is really the same thing as helping, but it's more. You see, labor is helping when it hurts. See, everyone can come and they can help, but someone is going to have to really tackle the difficult things. When my wife was giving birth to our children, now you can be certain I was trying to do everything that I could to help her, right? But she is the one that took on the labor. And the labor was what it took to push those puppies out. I could help, but she is the one who really took on the labor. And that's why, to this day, 24 years later, Mindy gets whatever she wants because she's the one who did the labor. I was helping, she was laboring, right? That's helping even when it hurts. And the mission is going to require more than help. It's also going to require those who will help even when it hurts. We need those who will lend a hand, but we also need those who will labor in the mission. And number 3, finally, there is risk. We need those who will lend a hand, and we need those who will labor, but we also need those who will lay it all on the line. This is just another kind of help. Labor is helping when it hurts, but this is helping when there's a cost, when there's a risk involved. You see, Priscilla and Aquila in this passage, they literally laid their necks on the line for Paul, and the other couple, this with the really weird names, they were actually willing to go to jail with Paul. So these are my questions to you. Are you willing to help? Are you willing to help even when it hurts, to labor? And are you willing to help, like these people, even when it is risky? What are you willing to risk for the mission? Your friends? Embarrassment? Your job? Your reputation? How about your freedom? These crazy people were willing to risk their life and their liberty. And that really demonstrates the priority that they placed on the mission. Jesus told his disciples that there is nothing wrong with the field. Now, we've all heard the verse, we've all heard the verses, and Jesus told his disciples that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the fields, that the fields are white unto harvest, right? He said there's nothing wrong with the fields. He says the problem is with the laborers. See, our problem today in church is not that there's not enough people out there that need Christ, or even that there's not enough people out there that are interested. There are plenty of people out there who are interested. If you will just ask them, if you'll just ask if they want to talk about it, there are plenty of people who will talk to you. Jesus said the problem is that the fields are white unto harvest, but the laborers are few. That has always been our problem, is that the laborers are few. You see, this is what it's going to take. We need not only money, but we need manpower. We need bucks and we need boots on the ground. It's going to take money and manpower in order to accomplish the mission. Now, next week, we're going to talk about point number 3. And that is, not only do we need money, not only do we need manpower, but we need a mutual interest. And this part, I believe, this third part is the most important part, I believe. That's just my personal opinion, but I believe it's the most important part out of this entire series, because it's really the glue that holds all of those other 2 things together. So come back next week and we're going to look at number 3, which is mutual interest. But in the meantime, find out how you can help. Find out how you can labor. And find out how you're willing to even risk a little bit for the mission. If you were to be back in Paul's time, if you were living back in Paul's time, whenever he was engaged in the mission and trying to get the gospel to the world, my question to you is, would your name be in this list? Would you be one of the people that Paul was commending and praising and giving his great appreciation and his gratitude for your help, for your labor, and for what you risked for the mission? Would you be in this list? I pray that you would be. And until next week, I'll see you soon. God bless.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that video. We would really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe, and don't forget to share it with all your friends so we can reach a lot of people. And